head looks giant.
It's the angle.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We are
Coming at you from a convertible. Very Tarantino of us.
We are about to go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I love Quentin Tarantino.
I know you do.
At a time, he was my favorite movie director.
I've only seen 3 of his films.
We gotta fix that. I think especially when I was first getting into movies, he was one of the voices that was like, oh, you can be a director and be an equal part of the movie and actually be the reason the movie's good. You know, and then as I went on with his movies, it got to be, okay, this is great, but it's the same every time.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm hopeful for this movie, because I think it looks like, well, it has, for sure, a lot of Tarantino-isms. It looks different than what he's been up to lately.
Yeah, I can see that. We've also never seen Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt in a film together. So it's a pretty big deal. I'm actually really excited to see those two act alongside each other. I love Leo. He's probably my favorite actor.
I love Leo.
In the biz.
And I love Brad Pitt, too.
I love Brad Pitt, too. Brad Pitt's in 2 of my favorite movies.
Ocean's 11
and Ocean's 13.
And, of course, my fucking favorite serial killer of all time.
Because we all have one in 2019.
Everybody's got one. Charles Manson. I'm surprised there hasn't been a Manson movie already.
I mean, there's been stuff with him in it and stuff that alludes to him,
right.
But I don't think it's been very directly been him.
Right. And I'm glad this isn't a straight-up Manson movie.
Right, me too. I don't think I'd want to see that.
And I don't think that Tarantino's sensibility lends itself to that.
Right.
But I am excited to see what he does with it.
I'm excited to see this movie. Let's go see it.
Me too. And no more convertible. We just got out of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Tarantino's been doing a lot of talk about this movie, saying that it is his most personal movie to date. And being on this side of it, I can definitely see that. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a smidge disappointed, but that's also because my expectations were extremely unrealistic. But I think the major issue here is that he indulges for the sake of indulging. And that's not to say that there's not a strong movie here, because there is, and it is a strong piece. I think it could have been better if he had someone who could tell him no, maybe save this.
You know, it's interesting because for a movie that is relatively slow, not a lot of action, and of an era that is not super familiar to us in our generation, you know, I definitely could see it coming off as a little boring. But having said all that, I don't necessarily think that those are bad things. And while I was watching the movie, I did recognize at times that things were moving very slow. But I was still very interested in what was happening and why these things were happening and how they were all going to come into play at the end. I understand how the pieces tied together. It's not that I'm not getting it. I get it. I just think that he had a lot of pieces that didn't tie into anything.
And it does that Tarantino thing where it's a movie about nothing for a lot of it.
It's definitely a movie about nothing. It's kind of like a slice of life, like you always say, where it's not necessarily about this specific thing that happened. It's just kind of a sequence of events that led up to something happening.
It's not what is happening that is exciting in a Tarantino movie. It's what they're saying and how they're saying it and how it's all very clever. I'll say this movie does that extremely well, because that's what he's good at. Coming off of Hateful Eight, I said the same thing. You know, you're the guy in Hollywood. You're one of the A-list directors. You're in that higher echelon. I guess he can just do whatever he wants now. And, you know, as an artist, I guess I can't knock him for that, because this is the purest version of Tarantino's vision that we're ever going to get. I just would have preferred something a little more cohesive, but that's not to say that there aren't great things in this movie, because there really are. Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are both awesome in this movie.
They have a lot of chemistry.
Yes, they do.
They work well off of each other. I was almost hoping that there was some sort of romance between them, just because I thought that would have been cool to see. Spoilers, there's not.
You know, and the other thing that struck me about this is that he did Django Unchained and he did Hateful Eight, and what he said about that was, I was warming up with Django Unchained, and then now Hateful Eight is my Western. Looking at this is a fucking Western too.
Yeah, it's very, very Western. But there's a part in the movie where Brad Pitt's character actually goes to the Manson family ranch and meets the Manson family. Obviously, he doesn't know that it's them at the time, and we do as an audience, so we feel that kind of like macabre, really like heavy weight of him being there. That energy, that way it was shot was 100% like a Western showdown, pretty much mirroring basically what Leonardo DiCaprio's characters were supposed to be of all the villains he was playing in all these Westerns. It was basically mirroring that, but it was Brad Pitt who was a stuntman. And it's funny because it's almost like a very interesting parallel to think that on screen, Leonardo DiCaprio is portraying like a villain, and that's kind of like one of his plot points, is that he keeps getting cast as a villain, and he's portraying it, but it's very fake. It's Hollywood. It's set design. It's dressing. It's all put together. But in that moment, that Cliff is actually on the Manson ranch with the Manson family, we're getting that like parallel of this is his stuntman, and you know what? He's actually doing a real stunt. He's in actual danger. Leonardo DiCaprio isn't in any danger because he's an actor and it's a set. But Cliff was actually, or Brad Pitt's character was actually in danger at this time, but he handled it because he's a stuntman. I think that's an interesting parallel to draw. And
it plays into that their roles also fit the personality that DiCaprio is a diva. He's fake.
He's crying. He's, an alcoholic.
He's so
insecure. Yeah.
And then you get Cliff, who is cool. And jumping back to the Western real quick, because we have the big scene where it screams at you, "I'm a Western." But even before that, they're setting it up the same way, where the dialogue comes in speeches and then it's broken up by just scenery, and it makes California and Los Angeles and Hollywood, that's the Old West. And when you think about that, the message of the movie is how Hollywood went from one thing where you could really pull yourself up and make yourself something to what it is now. That's what the message of all the old cowboy movies is okay, this was the old frontier and now we're moving towards being civilized, and you can't go somewhere and shoot somebody like this.
Right. So, you can't just walk into a job and get it without having any sort of experience.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And just because you've been here doesn't mean you're going to stay here. So he took the ideas of the Old West and applied it to what he was saying about Hollywood in general, which is why the movie's shot like a Western. And I thought that was so interesting.
Westerns aren't necessarily my thing, but I can understand and appreciate the merit in doing it in this way. And I even think that the title, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is very like an old Western kind of title. Once Upon a Time is a very fairy tale-esque title.
This, more than anything else, I mean, we've been being taken to Tarantino film school for every single movie forever, with just, he'll stop the movie and tell you, hey, this is a thing I'm a fan of.
They did a lot of that this movie.
I was just gonna say, this is the Tarantino fanboy movie,
I wasn't a huge fan of that myself.
I could see how that would be. As a fan of Tarantino, and just someone who likes to listen to him talk, even though I think he's a jerk, that's unrelated, I think it's fun to see stuff like that. But looking at it objectively, that's gotta be so annoying if you're not like on the train.
10 or 15 minutes into the movie, when you just have Brad Pitt, Leo DiCaprio, and then they're having a conversation with Al Pacino, all of a sudden they just cut, and then you have Kurt Russell commentating on like something else that happened outside of what we're already into. And for me, I was very like, whoa, this is like a tonal change. And I was like, whoa, I don't know if I like that. And then they didn't do it for a very, 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 very long time. And then they finally started doing it again at the end with this like narration. I feel like we'd knock other directors for doing shit like that. You either have a narrator or you don't have a narrator, in my opinion.
And specifically, we knock Adam McKay for doing that.
Yeah.
Vice. I guess the reason it doesn't bother me as much is because Tarantino has been doing that since day one. He's the guy that started doing that, where, okay, I'm going to use it just to tell you what I need to tell you. And my style is going to be enough that you ignore it. And in his more solid movies, it is. When I see him do that now, it's like, okay, this is your thing. When I see somebody else do it, I'm like, no, you want to be Tarantino. I get it. But there's there's only one.
I think of all the movies that I know him to have made, and the movies that I've seen, I think that this is probably one of the more docile films that he's done, and I think that it's actually one of the more watchable ones that he's done. Tarantino fanboys love this shit, but it's like, if you're not a Tarantino fanboy, you still want to enjoy the movie if you have an interest in it. This one, it felt very watchable, like relatable, I guess you could say, in that it's very clearly a fantasy. I guess that's just kind of appealing to me. It's very clearly, in a perfect world, this is how I imagine things to have gone. And I can appreciate that.
Because I respect Tarantino, he can get away with doing something like throwing Bruce Lee in the middle of the movie for 20 minutes for no reason in a dream sequence. A lesser filmmaker wouldn't have been able to swing a 20-minute scene that doesn't actually happen. But Tarantino is able to do it because he's got built up goodwill and he's got a higher skill level that he can break a rule like that and it works.
Right.
Talking about it, I actually like it quite a bit more.
Which is usually how you roll.
I'm actually going to go ahead and give this an A-. This is very solid, but it's a different movie than I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. But I can't knock a movie for not being the exact thing that it was in my head, and I did really enjoy it.
I think rating-wise, I'd probably give it a B+. I was really enthralled by it for the most part. I did really want to see what was going to happen. I looked at the clock and saw that 2 hours had passed, and I really wasn't feeling it. And I don't know if there was really a lot of payout with certain things, but I did still enjoy it.
Rolling off of that, everything
Spoilers.
After here.
Spoilers.
If you haven't seen the movie, stop watching.
Yes, stop
now,
watching
immediately. Obviously, he plays on that everybody knows the Sharon Tate murder.
Yep.
And if you're somebody like me, who I find that stuff very interesting, I know a lot about it.
And if you're somebody like me who doesn't want to see an 8-month-old pregnant woman get stabbed 16 times, you can appreciate this movie.
Well, he does a good job. He builds up the dread of what's going to happen from the middle of the movie, which I could see people saying is missed potential, but to me it's subversion of expectation, because he goes through the day that in reality she died, and if you know what happens, it's tense. But then he takes the Inglourious Bastards route and he subverts it entirely.
As I said before in the non-spoiler section, I really do appreciate the way they ended this film. I was, like Oliver said, I was filled with dread. I was very, very, very nervous.
It plays, again, very heavily on the event itself. So when you're watching, you're getting the beats. You're still getting, oh, they went to the wrong address. Fuck. In reality, that was what was so sad about Sharon Tate, especially, was that she really had nothing to do with it. She wasn't even the person he was looking for.
Right.
So to play it that, oh, he still has the wrong address, but wouldn't it have been nice if he had the address of somebody who would have kicked the shit into whoever showed up at the house?
Yep.
We talked about it being a fairy tale. Obviously the big broad stroke of it being a fairy tale is it's nice to see that the murder doesn't happen, even if it's just pretend for a little bit. It's nice, because they set that up. And by the way, they do a lot of cool stuff with just having you really dread what's happening between her watching herself, the real Sharon Tate, in the movie. But then there's little creepy things like Manson walking in her garden at the beginning of the movie, and then there's a shot when she's driving to the movie theater and you see the car that Manson's been driving around in
following her,
and it switches lanes.
Yeah.
They don't do anything else.
No.
It's one shot. You don't see the car again, but
I noticed that.
That was chilling. The broad stroke of it being a fairy tale is the murder and what everybody knows, but then it also goes back to the idea of it being a Western that DiCaprio says very early on, oh, it would be great if I could get in with Polanski, because that's the way the business is going, and he's the hot director. And that's not going to happen because he's a has-been, and so storytelling tells you...
If the story were to be told the correct way, it would have never happened,
right? Because
he would have moved, and not wanted to have been associated with that,
right,
anymore.
It's nice that at the end, and I guess this is also a fantasy land where Roman Polanski's not a creep, which I guess I have my opinions about too, but they're not important here,
I mean, to be fair, the Roman Polanski that is being portrayed in this movie is not the Roman Polanski that did the things that he did.
And he's smart. He doesn't have to talk.
Right.
It's nice to see DiCaprio at the end of the movie able to hold on to the career, because he goes up and he talks to the hottest director in Hollywood, you know.
Yep.
And again, that plays into the pretend nature of it all, that's really not how it would have worked out. But isn't it nice if we could have held on to something like that, where movie making was actually much more pure and there was a different business behind it,
right?
And because you were trying, you got to do it.
It was really, the summer of 1969 was a big turning point for a lot of people and in Hollywood and whatnot. So it kind of, this movie kind of says, well, what if it wasn't? You know, what if things did kind of remain the way that they were going, in which, you know, people who were older actors back from the Western days could still thrive in Hollywood, and they could get in with the younger crowd, and, you know, things could be kind of a happily ever after. And, you know, it's interesting to think that way, because it's not just giving Sharon Tate a happy ending, but it's giving other actors of that time period and other people who were really struggling, you know, to live the Hollywood life and the Hollywood dream, giving them the chance to then have a happy ending as well.
And something that everybody wants, even if you're not an actor, you know, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could stay in my prime forever? And, you know, it's sad, but it's nice to think just for a second, hey, it could happen.
And, well, in that movie too, you know, you're really invested in the relationship that Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt have with one another. And at that point in time, we were being told as an audience that they were now going to kind of part ways.
Right.
Because Leonardo DiCaprio kind of knew that he was a has-been and knew that he wasn't really going to be getting the roles, knew he couldn't afford to keep paying, you know, Brad Pitt's character to be around and, you know, be his kind of like assistant, I guess you could say. But they were having that one last night together, but maybe being with Roman Polanski and with Sharon Tate, you know, maybe he could get another big movie role and he could keep Brad Pitt on and he could revamp his career. And, you know, that is what more ties directly into the main plot of the movie that we were watching.
And going back to it being a turning point, 1969 too, that's, I think, what he meant specifically by it's the most personal film for him, because he wasn't working in Hollywood yet. You know that he was very into film, very young, and that his favorite kind of movie were the movies that were happening back then, and that's the Hollywood that he idealized, and that's why he went and worked at the video store where he wrote Reservoir Dogs, is because he was so inspired by this stuff. I mean, and obviously that's a big impact. That's your whole life that got changed because of because of this style of art that doesn't exist anymore. So I could see, hey, I'm really nostalgic for this, and it would be really nice if it could have kept going, but I know why it couldn't.
Right.
And I think that that's actually kind of profound.
I agree. Once upon a time in Hollywood.
Once upon a time, I'm going to go home and go to sleep now.
Yep. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks for watching Ride Home Reviews.